Welcome to the Geoeconomics Podcast. I'm your host, Alexa Bermozovich, and today I'll be speaking with Ainsley Brown. Ainsley is the Regulatory Trade and Monitoring Director at Jamaica's Special Economic Zone Authority. I think this discussion will appeal most to SEZ directors and managers, as we went into the advantages that Jamaica's zones in particular have, but also how this reflects on zones in general, from fiscal to culture to geoeconomics. There are a lot of layers to any zone and the advantages they can offer. So I hope that you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, and let's get into it. Ainsley, thank you very much for coming in today. How are you feeling today?
Pretty good. Pretty good. Sun's shining and just another warm day in Jamaica.
Oh, that's exactly how I wanted to seg into the first question and kind of the first subject of what we were discussing. The first thing that I'd like to talk about is what the COVID crisis has done for Jamaica as far as the tourism industry goes. Because as you mentioned, it's beautiful, it's gorgeous. When we think of Jamaica, we think of white sandy beaches, etc. So, can you tell us what the situation has been like since the start of the year? Is it the tourist season? What's been going on?
Well, it's basically been locked down. We have, I guess, different seasons for tourism. So, there's the winter season, then there's the summer season when people are on break, particularly the kids are on break and, families take vacations and all of that. Plus, with the winter season, people take break to escape the cold. Well, since COVID, everything's basically been locked down. The ports, airports have been locked down, basically restricted to cargo only. It's just recently that the government has opened restricted access to come back in, basically for Jamaicans returning to the country. But otherwise, it's still been locked down. June 1st, though, things may change. We'll have to see because the government has indicated that it will be easing some of the restrictions. We still don't know fully what all of that entails, but we'll look forward to seeing what happens. But basically, everything's been shut down. Hotels are locked, ports, airports, so there's no access in. There's access out because you're allowed to leave, but again, the airlines aren't really flying. So there are citizens here that are, particularly from the US, some from the UK and Canada, that are stuck here for a little while. But slowly but surely, there've been flights have been organized and they've been going back.
And how has this whole situation reflected on the special economic zone space in Jamaica?
Just like the rest of the economy, it's been a negative overall. However, we don't have any control over the negative. It's happening. It has happened and it's happening. We have no control over that. What we have control over is going forward and seizing the opportunities. And our manufacturing sector has been declining. Our global services sector, particularly in the call centers, has been growing. And we have been expanding in IT-enabled services and knowledge process outsourcing. And now is a time to expand both IT-enabled services and knowledge process outsourcing, among other things, including manufacturing. So there's the zones, and then there's also the rest of the economy. And the two, you have to take the two together because the zones are intended to have spillover effects. And that's a measure of success. That's a KPI for us at the Special Economic Zone Authority. How much of that is happening? So, of course, with COVID, a lot of our plans and programs have to now be tweaked in order to, in essence, acknowledge and work within, the quote unquote new normal.
Right. So, given the fact that you just mentioned BPO, business process outsourcing, as one of the elements that make the SEZs successful, could you tell me what are the particular advantages that made BPO one of the primary fields that the SEZs are active in, as well as what you just mentioned? What are the sort of policies that you think services like BPO can benefit from, particularly in Jamaica? But obviously, we want this to be a lesson that other zones can learn from as a precedent.
Okay, well, in terms of the attractiveness of Jamaica, it's a mix of things for BPOs. We inherited Special Economic Zone Authority inherited the free zones which we had to change over for several reasons. One, at the time, we were under an IMF program, a very, very stringent, one of the most austere IMF programs in history, which we did very well under. There was also our WTO commitments to end export subsidies and also to allow for free flow of goods between zones and the domestic economy. And third, and probably the most important one, at least to me, is the fact that we had to change for our own good. We had to change to modernize our regime, which was based on an older model, an enclave style export processing zone style model. So when the textile industry, the 807 program linking with the U.S. Declined in the late 80s, early 90s, the BPO sector worldwide was just starting to get going, and they were attracted to Jamaica, and Jamaica had space because the factories were being closed down. So slowly over time, the sector grew from that. They were attracted by the incentives. But one of the things that's often not played up, they were particularly in the call centers, they're attracted by the accent. Our accent is relatively neutral, and also the cultural affinity with the Western world, particularly the US, Canada, and even the UK. So we can relate to both baseball and cricket. We can relate to all of that. So it translated to having a workforce that could relate to the people that needed to be called and so forth. We also had a trained workforce in terms of, the universities that are here and their national training institution, Heart Trust, NTA, that's here. So we had the workforce, we had the accent, we had the cultural affinity, and we had the incentives. Now, with the special economic zone, the incentives have slightly shifted in that a developer who builds out a zone gets 0% corporate income tax, as an example of one of the incentives that's offered. But the occupants, the people carrying out the activity, get 12.5% income tax, and they're able to bring that down to 7.75 with 2 performance-based tax credits, and one centered around research and development, and then the other one surrounding research and development and training, and the other one surrounding employment. So you can bring those down based on what you have done in terms of performance. So that makes Jamaica attractive. There's another element to our time zone and where we are. We have been positioning ourselves quite some time, Jamaica, as a logistics hub, or logistics and trade hub, if you will. We're centralized. We're right in the middle of a 800 million to 1 billion person market in the Western Hemisphere, not too far from the Panama Canal. We're also right at what they call the Windward Passage, which is the preferred access point in and out of this region. So if you're going towards the Panama Canal, you will be passing Jamaica, because you will go through the Windward Passage, which is between Cuba and Haiti and us. So that's part of what makes, or when you combine all of that, that's the essence of what makes Jamaica so attractive. Even during the COVID-19 crisis, we remained open while others were shutting down. So a lot of business started to shift towards us because we were still open, and certain measures were put in place to handle that. We had a breakout or outbreak at one of the PPOs, but then certain measures were put in to control that, and then the sector wasn't fully locked down. It was partially locked down while the government ramped up its, social distancing measures, the sanitation measures, and inspections of places and surveillance going forward. And then it ramped up the reopening of the sector. So in terms of, your second part of the question, that's one of the attractiveness that zones can do in terms of being responsive particularly to a crisis. Making sure that one of the weaknesses, and the recent UNCTAD document came out focused on zones. And one of the weaknesses that it points out about zone programs around the world, and Jamaica suffered from this for a bit under the free zone regime, is the lack of monitoring. And before you even start to monitor, you have to put certain things in place in order to start to measure. You have to start to put in place certain things from the application stage, to ask for business continuity plans, to ask for safety and security plans, and ensuring that these things are followed. So they may not be necessarily part of your law, but it can be part of the condition to get a license to operate within a zone. And as such, when a crisis like this hits, they come in very handy because you have already had them in place. But then that's just part of the monitoring aspect of a zone. And you have to look at zones not just for the fiscal incentives that they offer, but what does it mean for your bottom line? What does it mean for your balance sheet? How does it fit into a global value chain? And how does that contribute to a global value chain being here in a particular zone? Like in Jamaica, we can speak to what we have, but other zones would have to find out exactly what their value proposition is and pushing that forward. Like now, we're shifting towards, as because we've demonstrated it that we can remain open during a crisis. We're pushing towards branding ourselves as a resilience hub. We want to say you come and do business in paradise. So we're positioning ourselves as a resilience hub, or IT-enabled services, logistics, manufacturing, whatever it is.
Right. I think what you mentioned just a bit previous absolutely hits the nail on the head, and it makes me think of a split of advantages that zones can present into commodity advantages and unique advantages. So for a part there, you mentioned the fiscal incentives such as tax advantages, etc., and I think those would kind of fall into the commodity advantages, which kind of result into a race to the bottom scenario where the place with the lowest tax rates is going to attract the most investment, because more often than not, investors aren't particularly attached to any country that they do business in. They have a fiduciary responsibility, and they just have to set up in a zone that's going to maximize their bottom line, as you mentioned. On the other hand, however, there's also the possibility of unique and unfair advantages, and there's a lot of talk about how zones are trying to develop completely new value packages for their investors, and I'm wondering if there are some best practices that we can take away from Jamaica's case, particularly.
Yes. Essentially, you have to look, as I said before, you have to look at what your value proposition is, and don't just think direct numbers or the balance sheet. Step away from the balance sheet for a second. At the end of the day, it's going to come back to the balance sheet, but you have to step away for a second, because there are a lot of companies that have adopted the UN Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and if you look at they're strictly looking at it from a balance sheet perspective, you'll see costs, but you're not seeing necessarily the benefits reflected directly. You may have increased sales because people want to associate with a brand that is SDG compliant and so forth, but you won't see it on the balance sheet that says this sale was resulting from SDGs. You won't see that, but you will definitely see costs associated with adopting the SDGs. But many brands have come to realize that climate change and other things are very important to the consumer, and they are shifting, changing. So with that, you have to look, how do I fit into this picture? Now, Jamaica, we have one of the strongest brands you can have out there. We have this cool, easygoing swag about us. That's brand Jamaica. However, how do you translate that? We have used that and exploited that in the tourism sector very well, but how do you translate that into other types of businesses, manufacturing, services, and so forth? And how we in Jamaica, what we have done is we have taken an element from our culture, so a word called livity, which is borrowed from our Rastafarian friends. Loosely translated means life, livelihood, living in harmony with nature, living in harmony with other human beings, your neighbors, your friends, everybody. Livity. And we've taken sustainability and combined them to a word called sustainability. And that's part of our branding as an economic zone regime. You want to, and it goes with the doing business in paradise that I mentioned earlier. You want to associate your brand with that. It's cool, brand Jamaica has that cool factor, but it also now has the sustainability factor. So you have to balance all of that. In addition, you can't ignore the other elements of your economy, which is why we got to where we are in terms of sustainability. Tourism is a major part of our economy, so we can't attract elements within our zone or zones that will detract from or diminish our tourism. So certain industries we just can't play there because it doesn't gel well with the sustainability. So if you want to come and be part of that, so in terms of how you use something like that, is you have to look at your own culture, look at your own value proposition, look at your entire economy, see the areas you wish to improve, and come up with something that's authentic. And that's very, very important, being authentic. You're marketing yourself, you're marketing your zone regime, your specific economic zone. If people can sense when you're not being authentic, if you're just going to attract people that or companies that, like you said before, they're just going after the bottom line. So the fiscal incentives. So all the other stuff they don't care about. It's just the fiscal incentives. Well, there's pros and cons to attracting that type of investment. But if you want to attract the patient capital, if you want to attract the investors that are going to come and contribute to your economy and contribute to the development of your economy and the development of your people. And this may sound, almost hairy-fairy, but it's real. You'll see that companies have taken that stuff and put it at the core of their brand. So if your brand and their brand aligns, that's a perfect marriage, right? And that's where you can attract that FDI or even local direct investment or some sort of joint venture. You can bring those two things together and both parties are happy.
Yeah, so several points that I wanted to touch on regarding what you said just now. The first one was that you completely hit the hammer on the head as far as the unique advantage of Jamaica goes. I think there are way too many zones in the world which, in the interest of good taste, I'm going to leave unnamed, whose primary advantages of a fiscal / financial nature, sometimes even subsidy style advantages. And what I think that will attract is the homogenous, internationalized, ephemeralized, commoditized investors that most zones are actually better off not having. And on the second hand, something that you mentioned are the advantages of sustainability, as you called it, and how that can kind of square with the type of investor that you guys attract. So the next question that I would like to go in, and this might be a little insensitive culturally speaking, but I always wanted to learn more about the cannabis industry, which is now nascent primarily in the Western Hemisphere. I was wondering how these two kind of square with not necessarily the Jamaica SEZ space, but also the country at large.
In terms of cannabis, well, we have cannabis-based zones here in Jamaica. At least 2 zones and more potentially coming on stream. There is a whole regime governed by the Cannabis Licensing Authority that deals with that. You have to get your licenses lined up at least start the process before you start to come to the Special Economic Zone Authority and get our process going. Because again, it's still a controlled substance. We have decriminalized it. Marijuana in Jamaica is very funny. On the books, it is, to be frank, on the books, it is decriminalized as of a few years ago. So if police see you with it, they can choose to ticket you or not to ticket you. And the ticketing system has not been set up yet. So no tickets have been issued yet. The Rastafarian religion has been given a special exemption whereby, at their gatherings, they're allowed to smoke it. And in addition, they can apply for a license at events. So, at a concert, there's one big concert that happens yearly called Rebel Salute, which is Rastafarian based. It's part of our culture. It's something that we struggle with because it is not something that we fully embrace, but it is there. It's part of our culture. Whether we locally want to accept it, it is there.
I was wondering also if the potential investors from the cannabis industry and other branch industries, if they might have the depending on the type of product that they offer, they might have a corporate culture and social responsibility profile that kind of fits the Jamaican genius loci and the sustainability model that you guys put in. I was wondering if any other industries other than the cannabis industry may have a predominantly Jamaican kind of mindset to them that would be good to square with sustainability.
With it, anything to do with health, anything to do with health, anything to do with agriculture. So the pharmaceutical, even though sometimes they've gotten a bad rap, but pharmaceuticals, Jamaica has one of the highest in the world, if not the highest in the world, of species that can be used or turned into pharmaceuticals or nutraceuticals. I can't remember the percentage that's there or the numbers, but we're one of the highest rated in the world. So that works with it. And that's one of our targets, what we call part of our P3 Plus program, which is priority, permitted, and prohibited industries. The prohibited industries are outlined in the Special Economic Zone Act, like tourism, for example, is prohibited from being in our zone, and financial institutions like banks and so forth in our regime. They can be support services, but they can't be directly, part of the zone, as in benefit from the incentives. So a hotel could be in a zone, but it does not get the SEZ fiscal incentives. In addition, as I said, agriculture, which marijuana is agriculture, but we want to take it to a higher level, more processing, and also agrotech. In addition, we also house the International Seabed Authority, which was brought in play by the Montego Bay, our second city, Montego Bay Convention, which we house that UN body in Kingston, and they are in charge of underwater sea exploration. And that has become, not without controversy, a major area of focus of many states because certain minerals are readily found underneath the sea. But again, it's one of those things that you have to balance underwater sea mining versus underwater sea life. We have to protect the reefs. We have to protect the fish and other sea creatures that are there. So the blue economy is very essential. The blue economy, the green economy, and the orange economy, or creative economy. I don't know if you know, but there was a big, what they call it, clash, or we call it a clash, versus created by Swiss Beats and Timberland between two of our major artists, Beanie Man and Bounty Killer, and massive viewership worldwide. That's part of the creative economy. And even with COVID, it's still an avenue for revenues to be made, particularly streaming online. Things like streaming online in like telemedicine and education. These are areas that we want to focus on as well within the zones, which would form part of the global outsourcing sector. We're also looking at trying to attract data annotation centers, whereby, to train AI, part of our 8 priority industries that we're focused on, the global services sector.
I'm quite impressed with how this discussion evolved because at the very beginning we were talking about the regulatory aspect of the SEZ, the fiscal advantages, fiduciary responsibility, all the usual stuff that we hear a lot about. But as we were speaking, I think that we evolved more in the direction of which geographic advantages Jamaica has that no other place can. So the indigenous species that you talked about, the ocean resources, the culture of the people, the artists that you guys host are a unique resource that few countries actually talk about, and I'm very happy to hear that. Whereas most zones are more often than not just numbered areas, I love how Jamaica decided to go a different route and go into the more creative, sustainable, and innovative industries like what you just mentioned about machine learning would be perfectly combined with the blue economy into creating autonomous underwater drones that can help in marine conservation or things of that nature. And it just looks like Jamaica, given its proximity to high investment origin countries like the USA, just sounds like an explosion of innovation waiting to happen in the blue economy, particularly. The next question: what do you think are the biggest threats, and playing devil's advocate, what are the arguments against Jamaica having economic prosperity in the future?
Yes, that's a good question. We have to really look at ourselves. We've been one of the slowest growing economies over the past 40 to 50 years. And the zones were designed, and the logistics hub program, the logistics hub initiative, is aimed at transforming the country into a logistics-centered one. And the zones are just one of many policy instruments that's being used. Another one, for example, is the adoption of the trade facilitation, WTO trade facilitation agreement, and the implementation of that to improve the ease and speed of doing cross-border trade and all of that. Those things are put in place because weaknesses in our economy, weaknesses in our system have been clearly identified. One of them, for example, is the high cost of energy. We started to shift towards LNG. With COVID, oil has gone down, and it's become one of those funny things whereby LNG is now more expensive than oil, but it wasn't always so. But we have not fully exploited LNG yet because we're still just using it as pure fuel. We have not exploited the cryogenic side of things. And this is where one of the unique opportunities for Jamaica there is, that which the biggest cost for a data center is energy. And you'd say, but we can't attract that to Jamaica because our cost of energy is so high. However, with the LNG, you now have the possibility of using cryogenics, the cooling energy from the LNG. So in effect, you wouldn't be using or burning LNG to cool the servers and all of that, because you'd be using the cryogenic. You're also using the solar to do electricity. There's also another possibility, something that they've done very successfully in Toronto, is using Lake Ontario, the deep water cooling. We have several deep water areas that are close to shore that could be used for that. So, the Googles of this world, the Apples of this world, and especially now, there's been an explosion of data and the use of online because of COVID, people having to stay at home, keep socially distant. That's how, sustainability thinking. You have to look at your disadvantages and see how you can flip it and turn it into an advantage. Crime is another issue, unfortunately. sadly, we get labeled as one of the most murderous places on earth. But it's a reality that we face. The government has been working assiduously to put in measures to bring down crime. But one of the best ways to bring down crime is to have development, to have jobs. And it's been proven here where, areas that there are jobs and areas where, in the past, there were factories and other facilities, crime levels go down because, people are employed. Again, the zones are intended for that. If we can get decent jobs, decent wages, it will help with the crime situation.
That might be a good note to end on, because with the COVID crisis and the various economic fallout from COVID, I think that it's useful to note that there still exists an entire world of investment opportunities and cultures that are willing to do business if given the opportunity. Would you like to share with our listeners where they can learn more about JSEZA and what you've been doing?
Okay, thank you very much. If you want to learn more about Jamaica and our special economic zones, you can go to JSEZA.com, which is the website of the Special Economic Zone Authority. You also can find us on Twitter, on Instagram. We also have another brand under the under the Logistics Hub. So you can find us on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. Also, we have some hashtags that we use. We use Jamaica Connects, because that's what we're about, Jamaica Connects, and Hub Active. So hashtag Hub Active, hashtag Jamaica Connects.
I do hope to see some more of that, and we'll certainly be using those tags on this video. Well, Ainsley, I want to thank you again for taking the time today. Do you have any closing thoughts that you want to share with us?
Yeah, stay safe, everybody. We'll get over this in time. Now is the time for unity. Now is the time for sustainability. Let's live in harmony. Let's be good to each other as nations, as people. At the end of the day, there's only one planet, and we're all humans, and there's space enough for all of us.
And what a statement to end on. Right on, Ainsley. Thank you so much for taking the time with us today. I'll be sure to have all of our listeners directed to JSEZA's website. As for Adrianople Group, I want to thank everybody for listening. If you'd like to like, share, subscribe on YouTube, as well as follow us on wherever you get your podcasts, Stitcher, Castbox, or whatever. If you guys have any comments, suggestions as to who we can get on next on the podcast, Ainsley, once more, I'd like to thank you, and take care in these troubled times.